our March Madness bracket preview on Outside Shots presented by TheLines.com. You can follow us on X at TheLines.US. You can follow me at Eli Herskovich. You can follow our crew with me in just a moment. But before we get started, remember you can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets over at BetMGM Sportsbook. If you're looking to fade and tail or bets at BetMGM, first-time users get that $150 in bonus bets if you are not a user already at that sportsbook. Now it's time to introduce my co-hosts, Eric Haslam at Haslametrics, the founder of Haslametrics.com, and Derek Wagner at DJ Wags with 2 G's on X. He is not a DJ. He is a personal trainer. First things first, guys. Why does Derek have an analytically final shirt, Eric, and I don't?
Well, I can't speak to that. I assume he went into his own wallet. He went to my site and he found the shirt out there. I do have a little bit of swag. I have some hats and some shirts and some things like that. So I'm guessing he probably heard it through the grapevine, maybe through Twitter or something like that. And I'm guessing he went out there and just spent his hard-earned money on some Haslametrics swag.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I went and got it, in like November or October last year. It fits a little snug though now after the holidays, put on a few pounds, decided to wear this one instead of an Illinois shirt today. I want to play nice. So, so we're wearing this one today. So.
All right. And to get things started, we're going to dive into our takeaways from Selection Sunday. But remember to give the video a thumbs up and ring the bell to get notifications whenever the Lines releases any new sports betting videos, including our March Madness takes. And if you're watching and listening to us out in the Tar Heel State in North Carolina, remember sports betting just went live out in North Carolina, and you can find the best sports betting promo codes over at thelines.com. And also, if you're looking to get an edge on your bracket, which of course we'll provide you, but you can do so with Pool Genius. The sign-up link is in the description. Sign up for just $37, which is a $28 discount ahead of the first round on Thursday, and the link is in the description. You get Calcut advice along with all the NCAA tournament bracket tips from Pool Genius. A great tool to use when you're filling out your bracket this time of year. So, Selection Sunday. The bracket is filled out. My biggest reaction, St. John's misses the big dance. I tear up my St. John's Final Four futures ticket. Derek also knows I bet St. John's to make the tournament when I saw those odds out early on Sunday. So not a great result for me, but Eric, I have a bone to pick with you because you had Virginia in the field in your bracketology deserve section of Haslametrics.com. So not only do I have to deal with watching Selection Sunday and seeing Virginia essentially get picked over the Johnnies, and on Haslametrics, Virginia, I think 35 spots ahead of the Hoos. And then I have to see on your site that Virginia is deserving of beating the bracket. What gives?
Well, first of all, the couple things. When it comes to my bracketology deserves, I'm kind of the unicorn when it comes to bracketology because I am trying to predict who are the best teams to get in the field. I'm not necessarily trying to predict what the committee's going to do, and that's a little bit of a difference between me and the majority. So what I like to do is I don't trust numbers that I can't see. I want to see how the sausage is made, so I trust my own numbers. So the things that, like, as far as that drive the committee, I try to mirror those myself using my own, like, for example, instead of the net, I use my homebrew net, which is called the H net. And a lot of similarities of what goes into it. I've done some time and trial to look at the two and compare them and say that they're very similar, but I want to grow everything myself. So when you look at Virginia's resume, where I place them, I put them as the second highest 10, right above the play-in teams, and that's pretty close to where they landed today. If you look at if you do the comparisons between what the committee was dealing with and what I was looking at, there's a lot of similarities. If you're looking at the net rating for Virginia, 54, the H net rating, my own homebrewed net, 52nd, a difference of 2 there. The predictive metrics had an average of 62. I have them at 58, very close. The results-based average on the team sheets was 35. I had them at 36. Again, very close. But one of the biggest differences that I think you're going to see is with Virginia, their quad 1 record going into Selection Sunday was 2-7. I had them at 3-6. Also, the quad twos were very similar, but quad twos don't get enough love. And one of the things at one point when I was evaluating this with numbers from Friday is Virginia was 4-1 in quad 2A and 4-1 in quad 2B. They were 8-2 in quad 2. But sadly, what you're seeing more and more is that those numbers, those quad 2 numbers, don't exist anymore. They don't really care about them. But in this situation, why Virginia got in, it was largely, I think, based on those results-based metrics that averaged out at 35. I think that they don't look at the quad 2 wins anymore, obviously not the quad 3 or quad 4 wins either, but it's that result-based metric of 35th, which got Virginia in. That was one of the things I was going to say. If you look at the predictive metrics, the average of 62, that was the one thing that was going to keep them out. But when it comes to inclusion or exclusion, I think that results-based metric, that rating that Virginia got was probably too much for the committee to overlook, and that's why they got in.
You know, I just really thought St. John's was playing good basketball here down the stretch, and it was kind of disappointing for me to see Michigan State get in. I didn't really want to see them get in, and then they get slotted on the 9 seed, you know, and I'm just like, that's a little bit too much respect for me, for Izzo and Michigan State. They haven't really done anything all season. And then Texas A&M, that win over Kentucky was kind of gut-wrenching a little bit, because after that they were getting in, you know. So lot of reasons why St. John's didn't get in. I wanted them to get in. I thought that they could have made a run in the tournament and maybe upset some teams, but it's unfortunate, man. It's really unfortunate. We got some teams in like Michigan State and Texas A&M that I don't really think were playing great ball. So it's unfortunate.
That's the thing, too. You brought up the committee essentially overseeding Michigan State, maybe just by one, if some of our audience doesn't think that it's big of a deal. But to me it is, especially when you consider that there's the Pitino factor too. So from that sense, I thought St. John's would get in. Also, Derek, you mentioned some of the quad 1, 2, 3 stuff where Virginia was undefeated, I think, in quad 3, quad 4 territory. St. John's having the one loss to Boston College, quad 3 in non-conference play. That was still a Red Storm team that was getting a sense of one another chemistry-wise, and they didn't have their full rotation when R.J. Lewis wasn't eligible. Now, we saw the committee maybe not value health as much as they alluded to earlier in the week, just because Indiana State didn't get in, and they lost a couple of games without Jason Kent, maybe a game and a half, to Illinois State and Southern Illinois back-to-back without their center. So that was kind of surprising, just because the committee came out earlier in the week and said Indiana State, reading between the lines, they had a decent chance still to get into the tournament because of Kent's injury and what that meant to them. Still, I'm kind of pissed off that we don't get Pitino in March, especially to Derek's point. St. John's press could have given teams a lot of issues. You have that matchup zone 2 that Pitino is flexing back and forth with a man-to-man defense. Transition defense was still a big issue for this team down the stretch, even though they had won 6 straight games ahead of losing to UConn in the Big East tournament semifinal. But they also gave the Huskies, Eric, a pretty good game comparatively to what other teams did against UConn down the stretch.
Yeah, ultimately, I look at their resume, and like I said, I kind of freeze things on Friday when I look at these things, because that's kind of what I think the committee's going to do. I look at what they had as of Friday. They had the 3 quad 1 wins, which was probably good enough to get them in. I talked about the quad 2s. They were 7-2. They had one bad loss. It wasn't terrible. But I think the thing that really did them in was the average, the results of the results-based metrics, which was 57, an average rating of 57. That wasn't strength of record at 43. It was the KPI that killed them, 71. And that was the thing. I think it was probably, if there's going to be one metric that did in St. John's, it's going to be 71 in the KPI, because if you put that down at around 43, like the SOR is in, all of a sudden the average there is 43. That's probably enough to get them in. But unfortunately, that 71, I think, in the KPI killed them. A rather arbitrary metric, if you ask me. I know it's been around a while, but I've seen some really quirky numbers with that over the years, and I don't necessarily agree with them. But again, the committee has chosen them for a reason.
Let's get into some of our matchups and that we're kind of looking towards for the first 4, and also for the round of 64, some lines that stand out to us here. And first and foremost, if you want to bet Virginia and Colorado State, even though Virginia's offense is pretty putrid to watch, Also, just one last gripe I have with the Who's. Not that I've had a few so far or less than a few so far. How do you not foul up 3? Like, the committee should have taken them out of the tournament just for Tony Bennett's decision to give North Carolina a full possession rather than foul in the final 3 minutes, and then O'Connell hits the 3 to send it to overtime, right? But anyways, I digress. Clearly, I'm pissed off. Good luck to anybody that wants to bet Colorado State and Virginia, even though I do like the Rams point guard, Isaiah Stevens, quite a bit, and Nico Medved, for that matter. First matchup we're going to discuss is the second leg of the first 4, looking at the South region. Obviously, first 4 taking place in Dayton. Colorado is looking at this bracket right now. Colorado a 2-point favorite against Boise State in the first 4 on Wednesday. Eric, I mentioned this to you going back to a Twitter conversation we had a week or so ago. Mountain West teams 36 and 66 and 1 in the NCAA tournament since 2003, and that includes San Diego State's run dating back to last season, making it obviously to the championship game. My numbers have this right around Colorado -3.5. Haslam touches, I think it's Colorado -2.5. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, when we get to you on this one. But Derek, I want to start with you. I have some notes on this one, but you go first, and then we'll get to Eric here.
Okay, yeah. I do think Boise is kind of vulnerable in this matchup against Colorado. Their rim field goal percentage on defense is 65%, ranks in the 25th percentile per CBB analytics. And then on the flip side, you got Colorado, who just attacks the rim a lot. The Buffs are second in near proximity field goal attempts per game at just under 40. I just think it's a bad matchup here for Boise State a little bit. So I do kind of want to get in on Colorado. Colorado does have their freshman Cody Williams back from injury, and they're just getting healthier a little bit. It's kind of a team that's trending upwards, and they had a really good run in the Pac-12 tournament. I am going to place a bet on Colorado. I have to look and see what number we're going to get, but or see what the number is now. I'm seeing 2.5. I see 1-2 out there, so I think I'm going to place a bet on Colorado here. It's fun to fade the Mountain West in the tournament. So yeah, I think I'll take a bet on Colorado here.
What about you, Eric?
Some really balanced teams here where you're looking at Colorado 20th in offensive efficiency for me, 29th in defensive efficiency. Boise 34th on the offensive end, 42nd on the defensive end. As you mentioned before, I look at this game, I have Colorado roughly by about 2.5. The over-under is about 145. The momentum and the away from home metrics, both teams not fantastic in this regard. I think away from home Colorado I have as 347th in the country, 322nd for Boise State. Now that doesn't always mean that you're like really bad away from home. I always kind of say that like you can be elite at home and then be just good at away from home, and then it'll kind of make your away from home numbers look a little bad. But in this situation, the fact that Colorado is 347th in away from home leads me to tell people and say you're looking at a team that really bolstered its numbers by home performances, which means it's going to probably underperform playing away from home. But that's unfortunately kind of the same situation for Boise State as well. I still think, though, that momentum in the away from home heads a little bit towards Boise State, so I could definitely see this spread kind of drifting a little bit more closer to the center line, maybe Colorado by 2. But that's the way I'm looking at it right now. I'm thinking it's probably about a Colorado 2-point spread. I know you said 3.5, so it could be pretty close.
Yeah, I side with fair points about Colorado home court. It's really interesting just because we knock Boise State in the Mountain West, especially with that trend that I mentioned. And to preface, I'm not saying bet Colorado just because of the trend. Derek isn't saying that either, but Colorado also has the altitude advantage when they play at home. Boise obviously has that in the Mountain West, along with a bevy of other teams that play in that conference, the Mountain Best, according to some. Now, you mentioned some of the paint stuff, Derek, in this matchup. You look at Boise State, I want to look at one more thing when it comes to the interior play. They rank in the 91st percentile of percentage of points on second chance opportunities. Omar Stanley, Martin, and Dagenhart obviously contributing to that category. Stanley primarily one of the better rebounders in the country when you look at efficiency at both ends of the floor. But Colorado has the size to not only limit and diffuse Boise State's interior offense, but just being able to hold off Boise State on the offensive glass. Colorado ranking in the 93rd percentile in defensive rebounding percentage. You mentioned Cody Williams back in the Pac-12 tournament. I'm curious to see whether Julius Hammond is back. He's been out since about late February with that knee injury, and he provides some floor spacing off the bench, so an injury to monitor if Colorado can get back to full strength. Also, Boise, not really big on pressuring the ball or trying to generate turnovers, and Colorado ranking number 260 nationally in turnover percentage. So Colorado, their biggest offensive liability, likely isn't going to get tested in this game. I like Colorado here. I mentioned I make this game around -3.5, but I think Eric's point about home court advantage is definitely something to keep in mind. I'd be curious to see where the market is going to move. Maybe Derek, you mentioned there's 1-2 left on the board as we're recording this, could drift back in Boise's direction. So just something to keep in mind. Maybe it closes -2. But any other thoughts here before we move on to the round of 64 games, guys?
Just going to throw it out there that 7 of the worst 8 performances this season for Colorado away from Boulder. Something to keep in mind.
Essentially, Derek, Eric is telling you to not bet Colorado. So
yeah.
How you feeling there?
Ironically, their second or all those games in the other game that was actually the 8th game, which was a home game, was an understandable bad performance, which was Arizona. The worst performance of the season, both of them back-to-back, at Arizona and at home against Arizona. But the next 6 worst ones of the season, all away from Boulder for Colorado.
Yeah, that's tough. I think I'm gonna ride with Colorado though. They're trending upward, and I do like Eddie Lampkin down low. He's fun to watch down in the paint. So
and
I
KJ
think
Simpson.
I just think I'm gonna ride with Colorado here. That's scary though, the away from home stuff that you mentioned, but I think I'm gonna stick with the Buffs. So
and the stigma of the Mountain West, you cannot deny that. Except for the San Diego State team last year, that conference is 0-11 over the last 4 tournaments. So there's a reason that everybody in the Mountain West was basically 2 seed lines lower than expected today. That was one of the things I even tweeted earlier. I was like, oh my God, the committee hates the Mountain West. And then other people reminded me, well, not as much as the Big East, but still, we knew those 6 teams were getting in. I just couldn't believe where they were seated. They were 1 to 2 seed lines below across the board, with the exception of San Diego State, who has actually done something before, but everybody else was 1 or 2 seed lines off.
Yeah, I thought you were being sarcastic there with that tweet just because of the Big East only getting 3 teams in.
But that was, I kind of expected it. I thought the people were saying 3, and I thought they might throw a bone and get a 4th. But even in the official prediction, the one where I'm actually trying to predict the committee, I think I threw a bone to try to get Seton Hall in. I thought Seton Hall had a better resume than St. John's. But even then, they didn't get in. So it didn't surprise me that the committee only took in 3. What surprised me for the Mountain West was not that they got 6, but I was like, wow, I expected this to be a 6 and they got an 8. This team to be a 9 and they got an 11. It was just, everything was a seed line or 2 off for me across the board, with the exception of San Diego State.
All right, well, Eric is really trying to throw a blowtorch at my St. John's Red Storm and apparently your Colorado Buffs here. I'm
not going to be asked back.
Well, Derek, I have some bad news for you because I think you mentioned it off air or before the podcast started, or you actually said it when it started, yet you're not wearing your Illinois shirt. You're rocking the Analytically Final shirt.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to your Fighting Illini in the East region, a loaded East region to say the least. This game taking place in Omaha, Nebraska. 3rd seeded Illinois, around a 12.5-point favorite as we're recording this, against number 14 seed Morehead State. So I'm going to dive into this one first just to get it out of the way here, because when we think about spreads being, and this is something I like to talk and discuss a lot over, especially on first round March Madness games or first round point spreads. Spreads aren't what they used to be over, last 5-10 years. The opener, I think, for this game, though, was actually the true spread of inflation in the direction of Illinois' direction that we may have even seen 5 or 10 years ago. So long story short, I think this line was not deflated in Morehead State's direction, where we may see the market trend towards the dog just because Illinois is coming off that Big Ten tournament championship win over Wisconsin, and the market is seemingly so high on the Illini right now. And I know after the point spread got released, it dipped from Morehead State getting 13.5 down to 12.5 at some shops. But my number actually has this closer to Illinois minus 11.5. I think, Eric, you have this one over at Haslametrics, Illinois minus 12. And keep in mind, Morehead State coming off of that win over Little Rock in the OVC Conference Tournament Championship game. Illinois is elite offensively, undoubtedly. Terrence Shannon with 101 points in the Big Ten tournament, the second most by a player in Big Ten tournament history. But since the beginning of February, Illinois ranks number 161 nationally in adjusted defensive efficiency. They're giving up the 14th highest three-point attempt rate in college basketball, that per your site Haslametrics overall, not just since the beginning of February. And here comes Morehead State, a team that could give Illinois a lot of issues. Riley Minix, Ohio Valley Conference Player of the Year. And this Morehead State team overall, ranking 25th in three-point attempt rate per Haslametrics. They shoot it at a 35.3% clip from behind the arc. The other thing I really like about the Eagles in this matchup, just because Illinois wants to push the tempo, and you think about a team trying to combat that, especially as an underdog and shorten the possessions, Morehead State ranks number 335 in adjusted pace. So that's a pretty good combination if you're trying to limit Illinois in a large possession game, trying to create a lot of variance. To my point about this spread being inflated, at least more so on the opener than it is right now. And then last point I have in this game, guys, Morehead State's biggest liability is turnovers. I think they rank bottom 100-ish in turnover percentage. Illinois, this isn't your prototypical, at least like Brad Underwood team from when he was coaching Oklahoma State and maybe the first couple seasons with Illinois. They don't pressure the ball. They don't try to generate a lot of turnovers. So I really like Morehead State even catching 12.5 in this first round game, maybe even an upset. Eric, since I mentioned some of your metrics off the bat, what say you here?
Well, I agree with a lot of your stuff. On top of that, you left out the second chance conversion percentage. Morehead State has that advantage on the offensive end. So, I mean, if you're missing your shots, this is not like an Illinois team that is phenomenal at cleaning the glass defensively. There's going to be opportunities here for second chances for Morehead State. But you really hit on the high point as far as like a few different things. Like first of all, you said, like I said, it's about 11.5 when I have over under of 149. Momentum away from home metrics, the intangibles there, they cancel out. But Illinois is susceptible. We've talked about this in the past. The teams that I find the most susceptible going into the tournament are teams that are pretty darn elite offensively, but then are really lax on the defensive end. You think of Iowa the past few years. You think of LSU a few years ago, with Alabama a few years ago, or Ohio State. Perfect example, Ohio State when they lost to Oral Roberts. Same situation. What are we looking at right here on my site? Illinois second in offensive efficiency, 83rd on the defensive end. And you're also talking, and I thought we covered this a little bit last week, about the possibility of if these teams are hitting it hard in their conference tournament, boom, 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 does that have an effect? Does that stick around 3 or 4 days? You're looking at Illinois, who fought hard for 3 straight days, 3 straight games, whereas Morehead State comes into this game rested. They haven't played in more than a week. Are they going to be chomping at the bit on this one? And is there going to be a little bit of a hangover for Illinois? I don't know. A hangover people associate with bad performances, but if you play bang, bang, bang 3 games in 3 days, does that linger? And then all of a sudden, when we play 3 games in 3 days and you're off for 3 days, are you out of a rhythm, so to speak? Whereas Morehead State has been prepping. They've been rested. Is that going to be an advantage for them? So, oh my God, there's just a million reasons why someone would want to pick Morehead State in this game. And especially if you're seeing a spread that moves in the 12-13 range, the baseline ratings that I have show Illinois by 11.5. And if you believe, you could take, like you said, talking about an upset, there are worse money line bets in the world than this one. Just keep it in mind, I guess.
So, Derek, you look upset over there.
Yeah.
Why don't you vent to us to start off?
I'm not going to place a bet against Illinois. I want to see them make it to the Sweet 16. I've struggled seeing them, get eliminated early in the tournament, but all your points are, valid. Their defensive rating in their last 10 games, they're allowing 115 points per possession in their last 10 games. That ranks in the 6th percentile per CBB analytics. Their second chance points that they're allowing per game in their last 10 games it's 12, which ranks in the 19th percentile. So they're vulnerable giving up second chance points. They're vulnerable on the defensive end. And, you listen to Brad Underwood today at halftime in the Wisconsin game. He just said, we're going to have to lean on Terrence Shannon and Damask, in the second half of this game. He talked about that in the post-game interview, and he was just like, yeah, I told the team we're going to just give it to Damask and Shannon the rest of the game. So that's kind of where they're at. They just lean on the offense. They don't play a lick of defense lately. And you touched on it, Eli, with, these slow teams. Morehead State is 356th in possession length on offense. They play so slow. And if you're going to beat or if you're going to cover a large spread like this against a team like Illinois, you need to grind out the possessions and make them, limit the Illinois' possessions. So yeah, it's a kind of a bad matchup here. And then, Riley Minix, he can space out the court for Morehead State too, and that's a bit of a problem. Illinois struggled with that against Nebraska and Rink Mast, so overall, it's a tough matchup for Illinois, but I'm not betting against my Illini in the tournament, so I'm just going to sit back and watch. So,
the one last thing I want to say, and Derek, you alluded to it, and I mentioned it off the top, with a slow-paced team trying to cover a big number, just mathematically speaking, is a much higher implied probability than a team trying to ramp up the possessions in a large point spread. And it also correlates to the total as well. But this line, even though the favorite in this game, when I referenced UCLA Akron a couple years ago, UCLA played at a slow tempo, so it isn't necessarily the same thing, but this line reminds me a lot of that number, just because Akron, double-digit dog, shoot a lot of threes, play at a slow pace, can space out the opponent. It kind of has a lot of identical variables if
right.
Morehead State is hitting threes, but I think Eric hit the nail on the head. You had a week and a half, almost 2 weeks to prep for this game, and Illinois is coming off of 3 grinders, arguably should have lost to Ohio State in the quarterfinals. Mine and Derek's Ohio State Big Ten tournament futures going up in flames because the refs kind of handed that one to Illinois down the stretch. I'm just saying. So, Eric, any quick thoughts you want to wrap up here for our hatred of Illinois basketball?
I would just say that it would not be the worst thing in the world for Morehead State to put a little bit of a scare in Illinois, and it might be the healthiest thing. I've seen this, I think back, 30 years when it happened to Maryland, where they won a shot at the buzzer, ended up winning the national championship that year. Sometimes I think these early round scares are the best thing for the opposition. And when I look long-term with this bracket, I actually do have Illinois going quite some distance for one reason. Their second round opponents, I'm not enamored with either one of them. It's BYU and Duquesne. And I'm like, BYU has been a little bit overhyped throughout the year. Obviously, they've delivered somewhat in the Big 12, but they bolstered their numbers so much by blowing up cupcakes early on in the season. And then you have Duquesne. I still think Duquesne could pull that upset in that game, but I can't really put a lot of stock in either team going to the Sweet 16. So I kind of have to throw all my eggs in the Illinois basket, so to speak. So I think in this situation here, Morehead State might be the team that kind of rattles Illinois' cage a little bit, but I don't think that's the most unhealthy thing for a team who wants to go the distance. I don't know if Illinois' Final Four worthy, but I think they're Elite Eight worthy. Remains to be seen.
Well, my initial bracket has Morehead State getting to the Sweet 16. So,
nice.
Oh my goodness.
Respect. I like that.
All right, guys, let's head over before Derek decides to exit the podcast and anybody listening from Illinois does the same thing. West region, Salt Lake City, Utah. We have the 7-seed Dayton Flyers taking on Nevada on Thursday. 10-seed Wolfpack. My raw numbers have this right around a pick. Haslam makes this Flyers around a short favorite. Derek, this matchup stood out to you. Why?
Yeah, I'm going to take Nevada here. It's scary back in Mountain West. I know I don't want to it's hard to do, but I think they can really exploit Dayton down low. And Dayton's issue all season was defending the rim. They rank 246 in the nation in near proximity field goal percentage on Eric's site, and whereas Nevada, they rank 26 in near proximity field goal percentage on offense. Dayton's also 318th in momentum ranking on that Eric site. The one thing is that Dayton's really struggled lately against these tough defenses in the A10, VCU, Loyola, and Duquesne got them. These tough defenses that run you off the three-point line and kind of force you to take contested shots. I just want no part of Dayton in the tournament, and they're not deep. They're like bottom 50 in bench minutes. They're not a deep team, and ever since Bennett got hurt, they haven't really been good. They've kind of been scuffling lately, so I just kind of want to fade them against a good defense that Nevada has. So, and Nevada can kind of limit them from behind the arc too. Nevada's 38th in three-point defense, only letting opponents shoot 31% from behind the arc. Dayton can kind of space them out and give them problems a little bit, but I think I'm going to take Nevada here.
One quick point for me, and then I'll swing it to you, Eric. Good point for sure about Dayton's injury concern going into this game. One area I kind of favor Dayton in, at least of late, Nevada's paint defense, and when you look at the rim field goal percentage per CBB analytics in particular, they rank at the 44th percentile when it comes to their at the rim field goal percentage allowed over the last 5 games, and they've also gotten worked against Jaden Ledee of San Diego State. Dayton has obviously a really good big on Deron Holmes. So that's my only concern for you. I don't have a big enough edge in this game to advocate one way or the other. I make this round around a pick, same as Eric's numbers. But Eric, would you side with Derek here?
No, I actually won't, I guess. And the reason, so here's the thing. I have Dayton by less than a half a point. The over-under is 141.5. The momentum fairly goes in the favor of Nevada, as does the away-from-home metrics. So this theoretically could cross over to favor Nevada. And he's absolutely right. When it comes to Dayton, it seems like lately for every 3 games, it's been 2 negatives for Dayton, and they have a positive. It just seems like, every 2 out of every 3, it's just kind of a stinker for them. They were far better earlier in the middle of the year. There was one point that Dayton was like hovering right around my 3 or 4 line for a very, very long time. They've kind of fallen off. Nevada was absolutely rolling in a groove for a while. They won 7 in a row, but all of a sudden they get in the Mountain West tournament. They lose right away to Colorado State. And now they have to sit and wait. And I guess my question will be, is that going to hurt them? This is all of a sudden a team that was in the groove. Once you're kind of in that groove, you just kind of want to keep it going. You want to keep it going. Now they've lost the game. You have time to think about that last performance. Is that going to be a problem? Is Dayton going to come back and start playing closer to its norm that we saw earlier this year? And on top of that, again, we're going to come back to the intangibles of the Mountain West, who have struggled in the NCAA tournament. And I got to think, last year, play-in game Nevada against Arizona State, what happened in that game? They got absolutely trounced, got absolutely embarrassed. Are they going to wilt under the hot lights again, Nevada? I don't know. I think that the ceiling for Dayton is higher. The results lately have benefited Nevada, but I'd like to say I think Dayton is a better team here. I think Dayton potentially could even upset Arizona in the second round. That's what I have in my first pick in my bracket right now. I'm never a big fan of Arizona. I need to have someone on that 7 to 10 line who's going to get me to the Sweet 16. And I would probably say, based on ceiling, I would pick Dayton myself.
Derek, any rebuttal?
No, not really. Dayton's just a team that has been unimpressive to me down the stretch lately. They were really high on my radar early on in the season, but now I just kind of want to fade them, and their lack of depth is just so concerning to me. So, they're a team that I'm just looking to fade. So in the tournament, we'll see how it plays out, but I'm going to have a ticket on Nevada here.
Very, very true. 5 of 7 games have been negative ratings for Dayton. So yeah, they have not played well, but like I said, sometimes I'm looking at that and I'm like, unless it's a horrible string of like 7 in a row, I think the 5 of 7, I'm like, they're due for a little bit of regression back to the norm, and that's a positive for Dayton.
And one injury note, small but still worth noting here for Nevada, backup 2-guard Hunter McIntosh, who can shoot it. He's shooting over 43% on the season. He's missed their last slew of games, so just something to keep in mind when it comes to Nevada's depth as well. But moving on to the South region in Pittsburgh, looking at 14-seeded Oakland coming off of the Horizon League Tournament Championship, taking on 3rd-seeded Kentucky, who lost to aforementioned Texas A&M in the quarterfinals of the SEC tournament on Friday. This one tipping off on Thursday as well. My raw numbers make this right around Kentucky, minus 12.5, minus 13-ish. Point spread is around Kentucky, minus 13. Eric, this one stood out to you. So where are you looking here?
This was a team that I was looking at before the brackets were even released. There's something about Oakland, and I'll talk about it in a second. Kentucky, I have favored by 14. Over-under is 160.5. A slight away from home boost for Oakland. On paper, there's a big mismatch here in that Kentucky is 4th in the country in offensive efficiency. Oakland on the defensive end is 148th. So you look at this and go, well, why would you pick away from Kentucky? Well, as I've said before, one of the things, the teams that I find most susceptible coming into the NCAA tournament, the teams that are early round losers, are teams that are very, very good on offense and not so great defensively. 4th in offensive efficiency for Kentucky, 87th on the defensive end. And I think that's going to be problematic long term for Kentucky. The other thing I look for in upsets for the NCAA tournament is not necessarily teams that are acquiring wins, but the teams that are really performing well against high-level power conference teams. And if you look earlier in the year for Oakland, you don't see this from a lot of different teams on the 13, 14, or 15 line. But if you're looking at Oakland early on this year, they go to Ohio State and lose by 6. They go to Illinois and they lose by 11. They play on a neutral court against Drake and lose by 8. And then they go to Xavier and win that game by 2. So this is kind of the fingerprint that I look for a team that is going to be upstart in the tournament and take down a higher seed. But in this situation, it's even better because Kentucky is one of those teams that's very susceptible, great offensively, not so great defensively. If all of a sudden those shots are falling for Oakland and nothing's working for Kentucky, they're going to be in deep trouble, could find themselves in an early deficit and be scrambling to come back late.
The one thing I want to mention here before, Derek, you can take a look at this game if you have any notes. If you don't, all good. Trey Townsend for Oakland. And I, by the way, just to preface, I do like the defensive matchup here for Oakland, just with Campy's. He's well known for throwing that zone at the opponents. That's what Oakland primarily runs. Now, Kentucky can shoot it when you look at the efficiency numbers, and they can play 5 out. Actually, the highest 3-point percentage nationally across college basketball at 41.2%. When you think about Dillingham, Reeves, Wagner, Shepard. The fact that Shepard is shooting over 52% on the season from 3 and he's missed 0 games is just absurd when you think about holding your efficiency over the full length of a season. So from that sense, Kentucky doesn't line up well, but experienced Oakland team that has a really good score down low that maybe Kentucky's size can negate, but just a little bit of a different look, especially an experienced coach in Campy. It may not be the worst thing, even though Kentucky theoretically matches up well against his own defense. The one point that I think goes against Kentucky here or goes against Oakland, I should say, Kentucky has the length to bother Townsend down low, and Townsend doesn't really space the floor. I think he has a top 250 possession rate across college basketball, so Oakland pretty much runs their offense through him, especially when you think about this on a national level. So, I don't necessarily have an edge towards Kentucky. Like I said, I make this right around Kentucky, minus 12.5, but I don't necessarily favor Oakland enough to advocate betting it. But Derek, anything here before we move on?
No, not really. Kentucky's defense is concerning it's going to be concerning when they get to the Sweet 16 if they get there. I'm not looking to back Oakland here. It is a large number. You can get I see a 14 right now, so you can grab that. But I'm not looking to fade Kentucky right now. I look to fade them maybe later on in the tournament, but not right now. So,
yeah.
All right, let's shift over to the Midwest region. Going back to Salt Lake City, number 4, Kansas. 4-seeded Kansas taking on Samford on Thursday, 13-seeded Samford. My numbers make this around Kansas minus 9, assuming McCullough is in the lineup. Eric, you have this closer to Kansas minus 10, but Derek, you're looking at the dog here, right?
Yeah, I am. And, so many people are looking to fade Kansas in the tournament. When I first opened up a sportsbook app, I looked and I saw a 9.5 and I went to shop it. And then I went back to that sportsbook and the 9.5 was gone. It was down to 8.5 already. So I just grabbed the 8.5 while I could.
Can
Samford,
you really quickly, Derek, can you speak to and we could all touch on this, but since you brought up the example, can you speak to the importance of price shopping, especially this time of the year where the market is going to move within a matter of seconds when sharp money comes down on a dog?
Yeah, you have to be quick to it. And that's what makes it important to get the best number you can. If you think a number is going to move towards a dog, if you think a dog is going to get bet, you should probably bet it right away. But then if you are leaning towards the favorite and you think that money's going to come in on the dog, you probably can wait a little bit and get a better number on, Kansas if you really want to lay it with Kansas. I'm not laying it with Kansas, but you can wait and get a better number for Kansas after everyone comes in on Samford. So it's all about timing and trying to get the best number. And, I kind of missed out on that 9.5, but I grabbed the 8.5 while I could. So you just got price shop and have, all the apps that you can and, try and get the best number you can.
So what do you make of this game? Why do you like Samford?
So Samford, they press a lot. They will come out and press Kansas right off the rip, and that's going to be a problem for Kansas. They struggled against Iowa State. They struggled against Houston in the Big 12 when they have to deal with these high pressure defenses. And Kansas's lack of depth is concerning to everyone. They rank 318th in bench minutes, and Hunter Dickinson, McCullough, Bill Self said they're going to play in the tournament. We'll see. I don't know if they're going to get both of them. I think they'll get one. I don't know if Dickinson's going to play. But, Samford, they shoot a lot of threes, too. Almost 25 a game, which ranks in the top 65 in the country. Then you have Kansas. They allow a ton of clean looks from the perimeter. They rank 193rd per shot quality and open three rate. So I think Samford can kind of keep this game close, especially if they press and turn Kansas over. Kansas just has not dealt with that very well this year. So, and then Samford, they play at a fast tempo too. So if they're running down the floor against Kansas, who does not have depth, it's just going to be a struggle for Kansas to cover this number, I think. So yeah, I'll be looking towards Samford. And, if McCullough or Dickinson are out, they're going to rely on Johnny Furphy a lot. And he kind of hit a freshman wall this year. Everyone does. But they're going to rely on him a lot against this team, and I don't know if he's going to be able to come through and help cover a number like this. So I grabbed the 8.5 while I could. So yeah.
And just to bounce off of what you were saying injury-wise for the Jayhawks, McCullough has not been cleared to practice yet. Bill Self didn't offer much more on his status. Obviously, he missed Kansas's lone game in the Big 12 tournament, a loss to Cincinnati. And Hunter Dickinson, though, is practicing with that shoulder injury, the dislocated shoulder that he suffered against Houston in their regular season finale. You mentioned Kansas's susceptibility against opponents' three-point attempts. They're allowing a top 70 three-point scoring rate across college basketball. That has a lot to do with Dickinson in-drop coverage. But Samford doesn't have a lot of size to combat Dickinson. And then you mentioned Samford and their press against Kansas. I think Harris's ball pressure could be a little bit of an issue for Rylan Jones, who is experienced at the Division I level. He played at Utah before he transferred to Samford, but still 17% turnover rate. I don't love that against Harris. I don't hate the bet. I just would maybe need a point and a half more to take Samford. This is maybe an example of a line to me that isn't what it would have been 5 or 10 years ago. But I don't blame you for taking Samford, especially if McCullough doesn't go. Eric, what do you make of this game, the final one we discuss on Thursday?
Yeah, Kansas by 9.5 over under of 156, and it's standard of the Rick Byrd fingerprint of offense. The team that completely avoids the mid-range shot. These guys launch a lot of threes, but they will try to get the ball inside as well. They're 75th in the country in percentage of near proximity attempts, 65th in 3-point attempts when it comes to the percentage. But then when it talks to the mid-range, 340th. So they're going to avoid the mid-range game at all costs. As we mentioned, Samford will run. I have them 9th in the country in pace. They make a ton of threes. They're 19th in the country in adjusted 3-point percentage. We talked about the turnovers, 14th in the country in potential points off of steals. But the problem is going to be the size issue. Very few second chances. The second chance metrics do not reflect well. So those shots really do have to be falling against Kansas. But in their favor, Kansas's defensive 3-point attempt rate, 300th in the country. So even though they do fairly decent in defensive 3-point percentage, the more glaring number is the fact that they allow so many threes against the opposition. They're going to have to change their philosophy a little bit against this team. And we've seen sometimes these bigger teams like Kansas all of a sudden play the smaller, quicker teams and have a boatload of trouble with it. I always think back to UMBC and Virginia. Virginia was not terribly huge, but that young, quicker team, those teams that come out of a team like the SoCon can really give problems for a team like Kansas. So Kansas might have to change their strategy a little bit here, and that might not reap dividends.
Derek, by the way, did you throw this Samford bet into our Discord channel yet?
I may have forgotten to. I should probably do that. There's still 7.5s out there. It's as low as 7 though in one spot, so it's almost getting to a number where like you can't bet it anymore because everyone has just jumped and ran and bet Samford. So because everyone wants to fade Kansas right now, it's getting to a point where you almost can't bet Samford now. So, or if you want to bet Kansas, you can bet Kansas. So.
Right. The only reason why I brought that up was not to call you out, was just to say that if you want to find our bets first round wise for the NCAA tournament, you could do so in our Discord channel. The link is over at thelines.com in the top right-hand corner. Derek has, he's one of the sharper bettors I know when it comes to college basketball, and he's going to be throwing all of his bets when they are the number he likes in our Discord channel, of course, over at thelines.com. And you could compare them to Eric's projected numbers over at Haslametrics.com, along with all the other tools that he mentioned off the top. Kansas is going to be a team that, whether they make it past Samford, we all think they're vulnerable in the tournament. Just depends on when you want to bet against them or fade them. But I think Derek is in the wrong for taking Samford, especially at a bigger number where this one opened up. Last round of 64 game we're going to discuss in the West region in Memphis, Tennessee. Oddly enough, number 6 seed Clemson taking on 11 seed New Mexico on Friday. So the lone Friday game here on the podcast we're discussing. My numbers have this closer to New Mexico -1 raw number wise. Haslam has this closer to a touch under New Mexico -1.5, and it is sitting at Lobos -2.5 across the board. New Mexico obviously coming off of their Mountain West Tournament Championship over San Diego State, really dominating down the stretch in that game. Clemson, on the flip side, I've talked about how much I love them, especially when I bet them to win the ACC tournament. They flame out in the first round of Boston College. I will say Earl Grant's teams have done a really, really fine job of covering the number in the ACC tournament. He's gotten his team to play beyond the market's expectations a ton when it comes to the conference tournament, just out of pure desperation. And I think Boston College kind of shocked Clemson early in that game, generating second chance opportunities off long misses. Now, that could come into play in this game as well. I'm not saying New Mexico State is going to be horrid from 3, at least from the get-go, but where Clemson is really good is when they're able to dictate the pace and dominate the defensive glass with P.J. Hall, Shefflin, and Clark. But New Mexico ranks top 50 in offensive rebounding percentage, and on Eric's site, Haslametrics.com, they also rank 18th in potential points scored off second chance opportunities. So that correlates to generating a lot of offensive rebounds. JT Toppin had 11 offensive boards against San Diego State in the Mountain West title game, 6 on the offensive glass, 11 overall. The other concern I have with Clemson in this game, Clemson's guards, Chase Hunter and Joe Girard, have gotten exposed against athletic, superiorly athletic guards on the opposite side. And that's going to be tough against a guard-oriented New Mexico State team, especially if Donovan Dent is healthy. I think he sat out the second half of the Mountain West Championship game with an illness. Jalen House is screaming at Evan Washburn post-game. You love his energy, but he also poses a matchup problem against Girard and then Jamal Mashburn. So New Mexico, if they dominate the boards against Clemson, that's a concern. And then the athleticism in the backcourt juxtaposed to Clemson's guards, I have a bit of an issue with. So I think this line may be a little bit inflated per my numbers and per your numbers, Eric, but I can't really get behind Clemson here, even though I liked their long-term outlook a few weeks ago.
I think we just jinxed them because we talked, and I think you kind of convinced me with Clemson a little bit when I looked at their numbers. We kind of said coming into that game last week that they had performed above the average since Jack Clark came back, and they were 7-10. Then all of a sudden, 7-10, they performed above the norm. Then all of a sudden, they go into that Boston College game and inexplicably lay the biggest egg of the season. Their worst performance at Haslametrics.com got a negative 36.8 game efficiency rating, which is pretty god awful. But I still believe that in what they can do. I think the positive features to Clemson that you kind of convinced me on is they have, solid conversion rates offensively from all over. They can get to the foul line. They can shoot free throws. All these things are working in their favor. And I think maybe you just kind of get this horrible performance out of the way, and then you move forward and play closer to the norm. Their weakness, as I talked about last week, was defending the three. It's very similar to Kansas, where they give up far too many three-point attempts. But that should not really be a big issue against New Mexico. New Mexico offensively, 296th in the country in three-point attempt rate, only 180th in adjusted three-point percentage. So the three-point shot is not going to be a huge part of the arsenal for New Mexico. That allows Clemson a get-right opportunity to get through this round. And I still believe long-term that what you said is a long-term future, that I think Clemson can overcome that stinker against Boston College and kind of make a little run, because people aren't expecting it right now. People are looking at that last few games and saying, well, they lose that game to Boston College. I think they lost the one before that to, correct me if I'm wrong, was it Wake Forest or no, it was
Wake Forest, yeah.
Well, it was at Wake Forest. That's correct. So you're looking at 2 losses in a row there, 3 losses out of 4. But again, over the last month or so, they've been a better team than they've been, the 2 months before that. So I think Clemson, a lot of people are sleeping on Clemson. There's always kind of that 6th seed that kind of makes some noise. Maybe Clemson is going to be that 6th seed that makes the noise this year.
Listen, I hope you're right. And like I said, my numbers are a little bit, and so are your numbers, are also a little bit lower than the market. But I think it just goes to show you the committee seemingly almost took New Mexico State out of the tournament. Arguably, if they didn't beat San Diego State, just because they weren't 11. They weren't at 9. They weren't at 10. Yeah. They were at 11 after winning the Mountain West Tournament Championship. Yet they're favored by nearly a full possession against Clemson. I kind of think rightfully so, even though my numbers say otherwise, just because, like you hit on, Lobos aren't going to space out Clemson super well. But if they're able to negate Clemson's biggest advantage, which is controlling the pace via the defensive boards, a little concerning for me. But I hope you're right. Derek, any closing thoughts here on the final game we're discussing for the round of 64?
You guys hit on it. Clemson ranks 260th in adjusted tempo, while New Mexico ranks 8th in adjusted tempo. I'm not going to have a bet in this one pregame, because when you have 2 vastly different styles like this, I just like to let it feel itself out a little bit and then maybe jump in live at a better number. So I'm going to stay on the sidelines in this one. Clemson, they do a really good job at limiting offensive rebounds, but sometimes in the second half of games, they switch into that zone defense, right? I think it's a 3-2 or a 2-3. And they can be pretty vulnerable on the offensive glass when they slip into that zone. And New Mexico can get them there. So, because New Mexico's top 50 in offensive rebounding percentage. So I'm going to stay away from this one. Ultimately, though, I will have a bet on Clemson if they face Baylor in the second round. So I can't stand Baylor. They're just terrible defensively. I'd rather back Clemson in that one. So if they can get out of this game, I'm probably going to back Clemson against Baylor. But this is too scary of a game for me to bet this one. So
I'm with you. I think we're all kind of... Well, maybe Eric is a little more optimistic about Clemson. I hope I didn't convince you too much on the Tigers.
No, you had the wrong tournament, and this is kind of my little sub-bracket of upsets here. I have Clemson and Dayton getting to the Sweet 16 in this one, so I got probably a 6 or a 7 going to the Elite 8. I'm a believer in Clemson. Eli, I just think you picked the wrong tournament. I think they can make a run in this tournament, just not the one before it.
That's fair. Going back to Derek's point just about their zone defense or man-to-man in general, especially in this matchup, the reason why I like Clemson so much down the stretch and when their efficiency numbers improve so much with Jack Clark in the lineup is his ability to cover against bigger threes or athletic threes that are the opponent's primary score. That's not the case here at all. Like, you're talking about a three who is a 6'10 wingspan in Clark, but New Mexico State combats that with a three-guard lineup. And Donovan Dent is a bona fide pro. So, and you also have Jalen House's dad, Eddie House. So, I mean, maybe Jalen House cracks into the NBA at some point in his pro career. Who knows? But a game I want to stay away from. I like Derek's look a lot if Clemson gets past New Mexico. I just have my concerns for this matchup. So, Eric, maybe Derek and I will jump on board with you ahead of the round of 32. We'll see. But, guys, it's time to break down our final four picks and potential championship winner. Now, I will say this is written in pencil from all of us, unless you guys want to state otherwise when I kick it to you for your picks here. And we'll kind of go briefly just because it may not be our official pick when we're all said and done. But Derek, I want to start with you. Then Eric, you can go. I'll go last. East region, West region, South region, and the Midwest region. Who do you got for your final four picks? Then we'll give out our title winners respectively.
All right. So in the East region, I'm going to take Auburn. They drew UConn, so that sucks. But I'm gonna ride with the Tigers. We have that 80-1 around their future with the Tigers. They're just a really deep team, and they play really good defense. Their ball pressure is awesome. They crash the offensive boards. I'm just gonna ride with Auburn here. And then in the West, I'm gonna ride with North Carolina. So we'll see about that. Their second round matchup against Mississippi State, if they face Mississippi State, has me concerned a little bit, but I'm going to ride with UNC. And then in the South, this is all like Eli said, this is in pencil. I'm going to take Marquette. It all depends on Tyler Kolek being healthy. Mm-hmm. I think that they would get past Kentucky because I think they can really exploit them on the offensive end and exploit Kentucky's defense. I don't have Houston making it that far. So Marquette in the South, and then in the Midwest, I'm going to roll with Creighton.
And Eric, what about you? What are your final four picks? Initial picks, unless you want to state otherwise.
Yeah, so I've made a few. I made a few futures during the season, and I kind of like to stick to those if I can. And the four futures that I made throughout the season were North Carolina, Duke, Gonzaga, and Creighton. And so my hope was that a lot of these teams would not run into each other before the Final Four. And now one of them does, but I'll take 3 out of the 4 if I can. The other thing I always make myself do is I'm not going to be like, I don't want to be like a lot of these mainstream experts. We're going to pick 1, 1, 1, and then I'll just throw a 2 in there. So I make myself do this every single year because this is the common fingerprint. I will pick a 1. I will pick a 1/2. I will pick a 2/3, and then I will pick a 4/5. And with the futures that I made, this really kind of mapped out quite well. Shockingly so. It never usually does. So in the East, I'm gonna stick with the favorite. That's gonna be my 1. That's gonna be UConn out of the East. One of my futures is coming out of the West. That's North Carolina. North Carolina does not have the fingerprint of a national champ because you got to have top 10 offensive efficiency. They don't have that, but North Carolina is Final Four good. I'm taking them in the West. If you go to the South, another one of my futures, I am taking Duke. That might be a little bit of a surprise, but I still think that's going to be the weakest bracket of the 4. And then if you go to the Midwest, 2 of my teams are going to face off in the Elite 8, Creighton and Gonzaga. Creighton gets through. I'm a big fan of Creighton. Depth is my only concern. I think this team is ready to take it to the next level. Last year, they almost made it there. I think this is their year. So I'm going with UConn, North Carolina, Duke, and Creighton.
So we have 2 Creighton picks so far. I'm not going to make it 3. Sorry, everybody.
Don't you have a future?
I
thought you had a future on them.
I do, but okay. I'm not always willing to go to bat for my futures picks. Sometimes, Eric, you have to say no, damn it. But looking at my final 4 picks here, Derek, I wanted to go Auburn so badly. And maybe I'll switch to it. This is my pencil picks. These are my pencil picks for Final Four. But I can't go against UConn right now. I know they played a hobbled Marquette team in the Big East Championship without Tyler Kolek. You alluded to that with your Final Four take on the Golden Eagles. But winning the Big East tournament and top 10 efficiency per your site, Haslametrics, Eric, at both ends of the floor. Top 90 defensive rebounding percentage, top 15 offensive rebounding rate. So when your shots aren't falling in, they are a bit three-point heavy when you look at three-point attempt rate. You can generate offensive boards. That goes without saying with Donovan Clingan at center. Tristan Newton is playing even better than he was last year, especially when it comes to limiting his turnovers. And one of the biggest difference makers for me, and maybe the one that got me over the hump, factor-wise, was Karaban's found his three-point shot. Now, that didn't happen in the Big East title game, but no one really shot super efficiently. It seemed like, at least in the first half, everybody had tired legs in that game. Not the case for NC State and the big man DJ Burns going up against your guys UNC Tar Heels, but it was the case for UNC or UConn and Marquette for sure. So I have UConn in the East region. In the West, Derek, I was smiling inside every time you knocked Baylor because I took Baylor with a pencil because you gave the caveat of Kolek's injury. I think Baylor needs Langston Love in their rotation a lot more than the results have shown of late. He's dealing with that ankle injury, missing 9 of Baylor's last 11 games. He means a ton more to Baylor than the box scores have shown in recent games. I know they got bounced against Iowa State in the semifinals, but I still think their zone defense, which they implemented going back to late February against TCU, can do damage in the tournament. And then looking at their path a little bit here, Colgate's defense, I don't think matches up against Baylor just because they don't generate a lot of turnovers. And this also isn't what Colgate's defense, or at least the level of play we've been accustomed to with Colgate at the defensive end over the last few NCAA tournament trips for them. And I think Baylor's zone would give New Mexico some fits in the second round. And I'm also not as high as Arizona in the betting market juxtaposed to Baylor. And I actually have in my initial bracket Mississippi State making it to the Elite Eight. I think they might give UNC some problems in that round of 32. So some shockers here. We're not going to dive too much into each of our picks. In the South region, last but not least of my Final Four futures, I bet Wisconsin. You can get them still at 18-1 over at BetMGM. Remember, you could use that promo code, the lines, one word, over at BetMGM Sportsbook to use your bonus bets if you want on Wisconsin. Wisconsin played at a top 25 level in non-conference play from the beginning of February through early March, where they lost 8 of 11 games. They shot 30.1% from three. They gave up a 39.8% three-point clip. I think that was just a lot of variance. Now, I know they allowed their opposition to hit around a 35% clip, 36% clip from behind the arc, but that's just a lot of bad shooting luck when you look at a 10 percentage points differential between offense and defense. Now that McGee is healthy and Wisconsin's rotation is at full strength, Storr and Hepburn are playing their best ball of the season, and three-point variance has also started to swing back in their direction, like we saw in the Big Ten tournament, reaching the championship game against Illinois and losing essentially a coin flip game to me. So I like Wisconsin in that region to get past James Madison. I think the market is overvaluing the Dukes a bit. Past Duke, your Duke Blue Devils, Eric. Past Houston in the Sweet 16, and then past Marquette, assuming Kolek is healthy. And then last but not least, I have Tennessee, even though they, in the Midwest region, lost their last 2 regular season games. To me, that boiled down to they're the top power-rated team among all of them, and I'm not taking Purdue. I have other reasons why, but I am sure as hell not taking Purdue to make the Final Four. None of us are. So To wrap it up, title picks. How are we feeling, guys? Eric, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to go into the championship game. I'm going to stand by North Carolina. That's a team I've really liked for a long time. I'm going to put them in my title game. They are not good enough to win the national championship. If you look at the other side, I have Duke versus Creighton. I have Creighton coming out of that one, and I guess I got to look at this one because there's only one of those 2 teams in the championship game that actually has the fingerprint of top 10 offensive efficiency, top 35 defensive efficiency. That is the Creighton Blue Jays. I'm going with Creighton. Penciled in.
Wow. Wow. All right. I'm hoping, man, if your bracket wins, I'll win some money. I think, Derek, you'll win some money. But are you going with Creighton too, Derek?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was gonna take Creighton over Auburn. So our Auburn 80-1 ticket dies in the national championship game. So yeah, I was gonna take Creighton. Yeah.
All right. All right. Listen, the one, Eric, I want to mention this to you before I give out my title winner. I'll just say it. I have UConn over Wisconsin. I'm not betting against UConn right now. I don't think that'll change. We'll see. One trend, quote unquote trend, teams that lose their opening round tournament game have never won a national championship. That would apply to Creighton along with many other teams that we've discussed so far on the podcast. Do you, within your metrics, consider that a liability at all?
No, not necessarily. I think all these teams are just kind of every tournament, every season, every team is very independent of one another. We can say that teams are snake bitten, things like that, but as I like to say, there's never a history of something until it happens, and then there is. That's how the old saying goes. And they used to say things like, well, Tony Bennett can never win the big game, and then he finally does, and then all of a sudden it breaks the storyline that goes with everything. We see that every little things break every year. Brian Dutcher can't get very far in the tournaments. Tennessee can't get to the Sweet 16. All these things are just kind of storylines that we kind of like latch onto, but over time, these things don't stand. Eventually things are going to change, and you're going to see something that breaks against the norm.
Derek, any follow-ups?
Yeah, it's tough for our Auburn ticket, that is going up against UConn in the, Sweet 16. Sweet 16. So, that sucks. But, I'm going to ride with Auburn until the national championship game, and then I think they die to Creighton. Creighton gets some revenge for last year, so when they should have won the whole thing, in my opinion. But, that's all I got.
My one thing in that potential Auburn-UConn Sweet 16, Tigers could run them off the 3-point line. And UConn's transition defense, when you look at national numbers, 56th percentile, and that's where Auburn obviously excels. But only 10 turnovers for UConn against St. John's Press in the Big East semis, which, not that was the only factor that steered me away. I mean, I have UConn, I think, power rated higher than every other team in my power ratings across college basketball, especially in the tournament, by around 2 points. So that had a lot to do with it. But Auburn's going to try to press UConn. And like I mentioned, Tristan Newton is a lot better than he was last year, especially at limited turnovers, which really didn't come into play just because UConn blew everybody out the door, seemingly. One last thing I want to ask you, Eric, before we get out of here. Wisconsin. We trashed them on the podcast last week. The variance thing in the Big Ten tournament, to me, I think I just needed to see it flip. You mentioned that you didn't really take into account too much of Clemson's one-game sample size of a loss to Boston College. I think I needed to see them maybe not per se quit, but just not die and not melt away, and maybe that there was some sort of a chemistry issue, just because at some point you would expect a 10 percentage point differential in regards to 3-point efficiency at both ends to start to flip the other way. And it did in the Big Ten tournament. Storr is playing at an extremely high level, and Chucky Hepburn defensively, man, against Braden Smith. We're not going to knock Purdue too much, but Purdue got away with a ton in the Big Ten tournament semifinals, and they got what they deserve. But the fact that Hepburn is playing at this high of a level, too, for me, was a variable that put me over the top for Wisconsin.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to see them. I don't know if I wanted to see them play 4 games. I mean, as a Wisconsin fan, I was at the bar yesterday. There. Yeah, it is, but still, I want 4 games in 4 days. I'm always kind of like, is that going to be the best thing for you long term? It worked out for San Diego State last year, but I always think of Iowa. 2 years ago? Iowa was a team that was getting hot at the right time, very similar in that was a team that relied on shooting to win. And I kind of thought to myself, would not be the worst thing in the world for Wisconsin. Get to win the games they're supposed to win, and then maybe bow out if they lost by 10 to Purdue. They gutted out that win versus Purdue. It was great to watch, and they lose to Illinois, a very, very good team. But again, I start thinking about the legs. I start thinking about long term. Is this going to be Iowa 2.0, where all of a sudden things don't fall again? And just too many memories of the past of the Badgers being a 5 seed, playing the 12 seed Oregon a few years ago. Is this going to be kind of a redo of that with James Madison waiting for him? I don't know that right now, but I mean, it was very encouraging to see what they're doing. They are healthier now. They get Kamari McGee back. But the shots have got to be falling, and they have to be consistently falling. They were in this tournament, like out of nowhere. It was like they were stuffed up, and all of a sudden it just let loose against Maryland, knocking down 16 threes. I think it was just incredible. But you can't count on that happening in the NCAA tournament. You just can't. And at some point now, are they due for a game where they're going to miss a ton again? And that's the thing. Eventually, when you're playing the game of roulette, you hit black 5 times. Eventually, it's going to hit red. And the question is it going to hit red now for Wisconsin?
But going back to my point, I think they got that out of their system during that lull, no?
It's very possible. And like I said, we saw that with San Diego State last year, where they went on a run and then went on another run after that. So some of this, your theory is, did they just get right? And if that's the case, as a Wisconsin fan, I absolutely hope you're 100% right. My biggest fear is just knowing what I've seen from Wisconsin far too often over the last 2 months. Are they due for some kind of regression? I hope I'm wrong. And I hope that this was flipping the switch and the rest was history. But there is that possibility. I'm a little bit unsure, being a Wisconsin fan, where my heart has been ripped out of my chest way too often by way too many teams in this state. I'm waiting for it to happen. So maybe my guard is up a little bit too far. No pun intended for Wisconsin.
I was going to say, if you didn't say pun there. Derek, any quick thoughts to wrap up here on anything we discussed Final Four futures wise? Any numbers you like out in the market, or just any closing takes from you?
No, I do have Marquette going to the Final Four, but all that's dependent on Tyler Kolek. So if he's healthy, then yeah, I have them going past Kentucky in the Sweet 16. But I can't bet that right now, and I'm already invested on Auburn, so I'm not touching that. So I'm good. So.
Just to clarify, Eli, you have Wisconsin and Marquette in the Elite Eight.
Correct. And how big of that would that be for the state of Wisconsin?
There would be a nuclear war just east of where I live if that would happen. So, oh my God, a lot of people did mention that Marquette and Wisconsin in the same bracket. Go figure. But you never know. It may be a rematch of that game that we saw earlier this year where Wisconsin wins that one against Marquette. So
yeah, great game up in Madison. Pencil, though, Eric. Pencil. Let's pump the brakes a little bit there. But he is Haslametrics at Haslametrics on X. You can follow Derek as well. And you can follow all of his picks in the Discord channel over at thelines.com. Link is the top right-hand corner. It's free. You can get all of our staff's bets over there. Final Four futures, championship futures, or single game bets. You can follow Derek on X at DJ Wags with 2 G's. Also, use BetMGM promo code, the lines, one word, to bet $5, get $150 back in bonus bets if you're a first-time user over at BetMGM Sportsbook. You can get a bunch of BetMGM and a bunch of sportsbook promo codes in general over in North Carolina. If you've never registered yet with sports betting launching about a week ago, and if you're in line with Eric's thoughts on North Carolina and Duke making the Final Four, then bet your bonus bets on Duke and North Carolina to advance that far in the tournament. And remember to give the video a thumbs up, ring the bell, comment with your Final Four championship picks and first round bets as well in the YouTube comment section, as well as on Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your favorite podcast. You could leave a review with your favorite picks there, 5-star review as well. So for Derek and for Eric, I'm Eli. No rhyme there, but thanks for watching and listening to another edition of Outside Shots. So long, everybody, and good luck with your March Madness picks.